And Job is part of these 5 books that we sometimes call what? Poetry. Books of poetry. And because they're not books that rhyme like our poetry does, but they're rhyming of thoughts. And a lot of Hebrew poetry that's a little different from ours. Job starts with the fact that Job is what kind of a fellow? Upright. He's upright. And in fact, there's practically nobody like him. And then he has a whole lot, and yet Satan comes among the sons of God and says basically, Job serves you because what? You've got that's right, you made a hedge around him. You take that away and he'll curse you to your face. And so what happens is he loses what in chapter 1? What was that? Children. Property. Yeah, property, family. And yet in all that he maintained his faith, his integrity is mentioned. And so in chapter 2 the devil has another idea. Let's get a little closer to home. Take his what? Take his health. And God said, you can take his health, except don't do what? Don't kill him. And so he does. And then not only has he lost his sons and daughters, he's lost his property, he loses his health, and then who the closest to him on earth is against him? Or at least is not helping spiritually? His wife. You're better just to renounce your faith, curse God, and die. And in all that, in fact, he said, you speak as the, what kind of women? The foolish women. And so at the end of 2, 3 of his friends come, which really present the flow of the book. What are their names? Eliphaz, Zophar, and Bildad. And they stay how long without saying a word to him? 7 days. Just their presence is there. And then Job in chapter 3 opens up, and he even curses what? The day he was born. Yeah, that's pretty bad, isn't it? When I just wish I'd never been born. Yeah, I go through so many difficulties, he showed. And then in 4 and 5, who speaks? Eliphaz. And we're going to have in the cycle, in fact, the first 14, 3 through 14 is the first cycle of the speeches. And so we'll have Job speak, and then Eliphaz, and then we'll see in chapter 6, he answers him. And then in chapter 8, Bildad. And then in chapter 11, Zophar. And so here it's just kind of a debate back and forth. And what we find in chapter 4, when Eliphaz answers, he says, Job, you've basically done what? You've sinned. You've sinned. The old adage, bad things happen to bad people, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to you, therefore you are a bad person. And the truth of the matter is, had Job done anything to bring these specific sins on him? I'm sorry, these specific problems on himself? No. And, there is a sense in which sometimes bad things happen to us because we've done bad things. Bad problems, health-wise, happen because we don't take care of ourselves. A lot of things happen, but not always. In John, the 9th chapter, when the man who was born blind, the disciples said, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? And Jesus said, that's not the case, but that the works of God should be made manifest to you. So there's a lot for us to learn. I've thought for a long time, Job, we know more about Job than Job ever knew about himself. Do you think that's a true statement? I believe it is. We know more, especially, we've got even New Testament commentary on Job. And we know more, especially toward the end of the book. Who am I to ask? Now I see, Job says. And so there are just a lot of things that God does not actually reveal to Job. You think Job could have understood, no, this is the reason these things are happening. You think that? I think most of us would be kind of like Job, God says, where were you when I created the recesses of the deep and Leviathan and so on? Where were you? When the morning stars sang for, what do you have to do with that? And so, we likely couldn't understand it. One thing we all ought to remember, when difficulties come to us externally, James says, count it all what? Joy. When we fall into manifold trials, that the proving of your faith works patience. And let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, lacking in nothing. We need to ask ourselves the question, how can I learn from this? Have I done something that might have contributed to it? And if not, what can I, David said, Psalm 119, it has been good that I have been afflicted, that I might learn thy statutes. Problems that come to us should do what for us? Strengthen us and draw us what? Even closer to God, not repel us. And that's what, Job's wife, just give up, throw in the towel, curse God, die, get out of it. That's not an option. Job, while we're not on this, suicide is an option for some people. I remember talking to an older preacher one time, and he said, if I weren't a Christian, suicide would be, a viable option. But when you know who God is, you know the purpose of life and how difficulties can strengthen us. Difficulties actually in our part can strengthen other people. Is that not true? Sure it is. And so we can see how they are going. We can take strength from that. But anyway, what I was going to say is, in a society that does not believe in God, does not see the Bible picture of life as we have here, what she said, what his wife said was an option. Just get out of it. Curse God, die, and no. And so anyway, that's enough on that. Any comment or question on Job? Anyone? All right, let's go on to the life of Jesus. And I'd like for us to think briefly about some of our, where we've been. So for those of you visiting, we have a few of you who are. And where is our thing, Randy? You know where that is? Our little clicker? Here it is. You wouldn't believe where it is. Right by my stuff here. Okay. We've been studying the life of Jesus for some time. And for those of you visiting, we've tried to emphasize through all of our studies, in fact with other people, that there are 2 or 3 big reasons why Jesus came. One is in John 1:18, he came to reveal whom? God. No man has seen God at any time. The only begotten of the Father, full of grace, he hath manifested, declared, and revealed him. That's one reason, to know who God truly is. The second is to give us a what? That we might follow his steps. A pattern, an example, 1 Peter 2:21. And so everything he thought and did, his reactions, all of that provide our pattern. The third thing, he came to Isaiah 53 to do what for us? To save us, to suffer and die for us, and be raised from the dead, that through him we can become righteous. So when we look at his life, we have these divisions primarily based on the Waldron's work. About 30 years of preparation. The beginning of Jesus' ministry began with what event? His baptism. The great Galilean ministry for the better part of 2 years. Then he retires, going on up into the capital, over to the Decapolis, all in this northern region for the better part of 6 months. And then he sets his face toward Jerusalem. Luke 9, about verse 50. And so we have the closing ministry that occurred here in Judea as well as over in Perea. And then he moves from Perea, crosses the Jordan, comes to Jericho, heals Bartimaeus, his friend, and then comes to Bethany. And we have the events of the last week right here around Jerusalem. And so we've got a lot of ink on this week. And we've mentioned before, often the Bible covers many years in few chapters, as we see in the first, even in chapter 5. And here a few days are covered in many chapters. due to this being the centerpiece of the Bible story. And when we say the last week, we want to, that's roughly or approximate, really about 10 days if you include Friday, when he arrives at Bethany and rests. And then on Saturday night, he's anointed by Mary at Simon the leper's house. And who objects? And this comes into our study today. Judas objects. He says this money could have been given to the poor. And he really cared about the poor, didn't he? He was a what? Thief. And he held the bag. And so we have that, and that seems to be the trigger that stings Judas to the point, I'll turn him in. I'll have a little money, he'll probably get out of it, and then nobody will be the wiser for it. Sunday, the day of triumph, going into the city, day of authority shown by his cursing the fig tree and then cleansing the temple. Good. And then on Tuesday, the first thing they notice is the tree had what? Withered and died. And then they come in on Tuesday. This is where we are. We're finishing Tuesday. Likely no record on Wednesday. And then the last day, we're hoping to get to that. So here the fig tree is found withered. This is on Tuesday. His authority is challenged. They said, by what authority doest thou these things? Who gave you this authority? And he answered that, the baptism of John, whence is it? From heaven or from men? And then he gave the 3 warning parables about the 2 sons, the wicked husbandman, and then the chapter 22 of Matthew, the marriage feast. And then the entrapment questions, the Pharisees and the Herodians, is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar? And then a Sadducee came to him about a man who's married, he dies, and his brother comes in, have no children. Eventually, in the resurrection, whose will she be? He answers that. And then the third, a scribe is put forward, which is the what commandment? Greatest commandment. He answers that. And then he asks them a question that they didn't answer. It's not that it's unanswerable, it was to them. Because if they answered it, it would admit to his humanity as well as his deity. What think ye of the Christ? What? Whose son is he? They said the son of David. They got that right. Well, how then did David by the Spirit say, the Lord said unto my Lord, what? Sit thou on my right hand till I make thine enemies a footstool of thy feet. All right. And then the woes against the scribes and Pharisees, the 23rd chapter, the widow's mites, in contrast to what some of the Pharisees were doing. We talked about the destruction of Jerusalem, the end of time that continues really, Matthew 24:36 through Matthew 25. And then we talked Wednesday night about Jesus' prediction of his own death and the conspiracy between the chief priest and Judas, primarily emphasizing Matthew 26, 1 through 5. He predicts in the first 2 verses, after 2 days, the Passover comes, and the Son of Man is delivered to be crucified. And then 3 through 5 tells this is going to be how it is accomplished. And the rulership was looking for opportunity to do what? To kill him. And so we talked about that. And then here's where we are, where we're beginning today. Judas then is their answer to all of that. We're on page 87 of our booklets. And let's read these passages. Now, we pointed out Wednesday night. Let's just go to Matthew 26 first. Matthew 26, verses 1 and 2. The time element is given, we mentioned. And then the chief priests want to take Jesus, but not during what time? Not during the feast, because they still feared the people. And then 6 through 13 deals with what actually happened earlier in the week on that Saturday night. And we know that because John 12 tells us when that occurred. And so it's put there evidently to show the connection between Jesus reprimanding Judas, and then Judas likely being stung by the reprimand, and now he's willing to conspire with the religious leadership in verses 14 through 16. David, if you would, Matthew 26, 14 through 16.
Then one of the
let's go to Mark's account. Mark 14, verses 10 and 11. Patty, if you would. All right, and then the other passage, Luke 22, verses 3 through 6. Paula, if you would. Luke 22, 3 through 6. Luke 22, 3 through 6. All right, thank you, Paul. I took a picture of my book on Robert. Several of you have it. A.T. Robertson's Harmony of the Life of Jesus, and he mentions this: Judas, stung by the rebuke of Jesus at the feast, bargained with the rulers to betray Jesus. Tuesday night, Michael. Judas is actually named in all three accounts here. Also, Satan. Luke says Satan entered into Judas. It doesn't mention that in Matthew and Mark. Satan entered into Judas. So Judas didn't really have a shining chance, right? No, Satan entered into Judas. And sometimes in a similar way, God can enter, or the Spirit can enter into us. Here we have the will of Satan, and that is, love of money, greed, avarice, disloyalty. All of those ideas are what Satan would like to push on people. So Satan's will kind of came into the heart of Judas. It's interesting. I've got a note on this. There's Luke, the same writer, in Acts 5, who entered into, well, I just told you. Who is the person into whose heart Satan enters in Acts 5? Ananias. Ananias enters Satan's heart. But who did Peter rebuke? Satan or Ananias? Ananias. And so there's a cooperation between our own hearts and Satan, just like there is a cooperation between our own hearts and the Lord, or the word of the Lord through the Spirit that inspired it. Remember the passage in Ephesians 3? Turn over real quick. This is not in the notes. Ephesians, the 3rd chapter. The last little bit, Paul gives a prayer, second prayer in the book of Ephesians, that they might be empowered to carry on what he really describes our applications in 4 through 6. But I want you to notice in verse 20. To him, somebody else, Landon, if you would, 20 and 21.
Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask or think, according to the power at the work within us. To him be glory in the church in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen.
All right, that's the end of the prayer. You'll notice earlier in the verse 16, that he would grant you according to the riches of his glory, that you might be strengthened with power through his Spirit in the inward man, that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, and so on. And then here's kind of a benediction, actually. To him who is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think. God is able to work powerful things in our lives, but there's a limitation. There's a measure of it. And that's that next phrase. It is what? According to the what? The power that works in us. God's power to work is in the what? Romans 1:16. It's in the gospel. And so to the degree that we saturate our thinking with the gospel, to the degree we have confidence in God that his way is always best, to the degree that we hate sin and we love God, to that degree his power is able to work exceeding abundantly above all that we ask and think. And so we have the deciding factor on it. Are we going to let that happen? Are we going to, do we have so much confidence and love for the Lord that we're going to follow him to that degree, he says here in verse, I turn back to Luke, that he is able to do abundantly above all that we are able to ask or think. Yes, sir.
1 Corinthians 10:13.
Yes. Let him that thinks he stands.
Well, no temptation
But taking such as man can bear. Yeah.
that we can endure it.
But yeah, with the temptation, who with the tempt can not not allow you to be tempted above all that you're able to bear, but will with the temptation make also the way of escape that you'll be able to bear. Yeah, good point, Landon. Anybody else on that? Okay, so Satan entered his heart. So he goes away, communes with the chief priest, how he might deliver him unto them. Oh, they're happy about this. This is our opportunity. We've been looking for this. When you're looking for something bad to do and somebody provides the opportunity, then it's like James 1 describes. No man is tempted by God, but everyone is drawn away by his own lust and enticed. Here, the enticement is the part of the devil and his minions. The passion, the lust is our part. We've tried to illustrate it. It's like, here's a fish hook, and there's the bait. Here's a hungry fish, right, Brother Charlie? They're always hungry, aren't they? No, they're not always hungry. So you have, here's a fish that's swimming around. He's looking for something to eat, and here's the bait. And so when the two meet, James says it's sin. When our passion or our lust meets with and interlocks with the enticement, then that sin is not just having a lust. It's when the lust hath conceived, and then lust, when it conceives, brings forth death eventually. Yeah. Okay, so they covenanted. Some think the idea they covenanted to give him money, that the 30 pieces of silver could have been a down payment. I don't know whether that's true or not, but could be. And they still wanted to take him in the absence of the people. Let's see. I thought I had. No, that's on the next one. Okay, so he sought how he might conveniently deliver him unto them. And then they weighed unto him 30 pieces of silver. And from that time he saw an opportunity to deliver him unto them. You see, Robertson had Zechariah 11:12, and then it's also in Jeremiah. The 30 pieces of silver will come back up in chapter 27 when Judas sees that Jesus has been delivered up. And then he takes the 30 pieces and he goes to the chief priest and says, "See, I have betrayed innocent blood." And they say, "What is that to us? See thou to it." So he does what? He flings it there at their feet and goes out and what? Hangs himself. And the 30 pieces of silver was used to buy a field in which what? It's a potter's field in which to bury people. Yeah, a little cemetery. And it's an interesting, well, we'll get to that in our notes. All right, let's go down to our number here on page 87. A under 11, the Bible teaches that who entered Judas? Satan. We talked about that. He was willing to help the chief priest and the who? I've got captains. I didn't see the scribes. Officers, yeah. Levites who functioned as temple police as to how he might betray Jesus. Language Luke used to describe his actions in Satan entered Judas is similar to what we used to describe Ananias. We mentioned that just a moment ago, when greed and pride prompted him to lie about how much a piece of property cost. Why has Satan filled your heart to lie? But in the same breath, Peter also said, why have you conceived this thing in your heart? While the existence and influence of the devil are recognized, Ananias and not Satan is rebuked. Ananias was guilty as if Satan had done nothing, all of which shows the devil has no power without Ananias' cooperation. Similarly, Judas had power over his thoughts and actions, but he allowed his greed and pride to take precedence. And like Ananias, he did Satan's will. I was thinking earlier this morning, just make this comment about all of this. Sometimes God does things directly. When fire came out of heaven and consumed Nadab and Abihu, it's just immediate, it's direct. God did that. The water to blood in the Nile, there's some miracles that God just did directly. Sometimes God does things indirectly. Just like Jesus said, upon this rock I will build my church. But who actually did the footwork in the building of it? Who preached on Pentecost and after? I can't hear you. Peter, the other apostles. So Jesus was working. God actually built the church through the work of the apostles. He did it. He's behind it. He's over it. But he did it through them. Then sometimes God is said to do things that he just allows to happen. Job, prime example. We receive good things, we receive bad things. And yet James says every good and every perfect gift comes from above. And then I'm reminded in Acts the 10th chapter, Peter said concerning Jesus that he went about doing good, healing all who were oppressed of the devil. So the oppression, physical problems and all that actually come from the devil. But God allows those things to happen. So God can do things first directly, he can do them indirectly, and then sometimes God is said to do things that he allows. In a very similar way, you have Satan working, the evil spirits. Then the thoughts that he can do sometimes. He did sometimes things directly. He does things indirectly as well. So there's some similarities. That makes sense to everybody. Yes, sir, Brother John.
Yeah, he caused me to think about the Apostle Paul and his thorn in the flesh.
Yeah.
A messenger of Satan.
Yeah.
But God permits it so Paul will not underestimate what grace has done for him.
Exactly. Good point. Yeah. And in fact, it was to work out for his good. Exactly. Good point. A messenger of Satan. Okay. Good. B, how much was the Lord's life worth to Judas? 30 pieces of silver. In my next question, what was that worth according to Exodus 21? A slave who had been gored by an ox. A slave that had been gored by an ox. How would Judas deliver Jesus to the Jews as they desired? Note Matthew 26, 3, 4, and 16. He would seek what? Yeah, he would seek opportunity to deliver them by subtlety. I mentioned in the note, Judas soon found opportunity. This was Tuesday night, what Jews would have considered the beginning of Wednesday, and the opportunity to fulfill his agreement would come 2 days later. Judas knew where Jesus would go, and so he had that inside track. And of course, in the whole plan of God, that was a part of it. I wanted to take just a moment. We'll come. I have a little bit more of our notes so when we get Matthew 27. I'd like for you to turn back though just for a moment to Zechariah. Next to last book of the Old Testament, Zechariah and Malachi, and especially chapter 11. Chapter 11. This is a fascinating read here. Zechariah is prophesying probably around 520 BC. The Jews have returned from Babylonian captivity. Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, the last three prophets, or we might say post-exilic prophets. And, they had gone back to some of their old deeds. They had rejected God's appointed deliverers. And so Zechariah is speaking as like a shepherd. And Israel had rejected many of the good men who had been sent to her and had a lot of evil shepherds. But I want you to notice down in, let's start the reading in verse 7. This is chapter 11, verse 7. So I fed the flock of slaughter, verily the poor of the flock, and I took unto me 2 staves, the one called Beauty, the other I called Bands, and I fed the flock. I cut off the 3 shepherds in 1 month. Some wonder what that is. Some say likely the prophets, priests, and kings. That probably makes the most sense. For my soul was weary of them, that is, these evil ones. And their soul also loathed me, that they didn't have much for God. Then said I will not feed you that which dieth, let it die, and that which is to be cut off, let it be cut off, and let them that are left eat every one the flesh of another. So it's likely he's speaking of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And I took my staff, beauty, and cut it asunder, that I might break my covenant which I had made with all the peoples. I'm not going to continue my protection for them. And it was broken in that day, and thus the poor of the flock that gave heed unto me knew that it was the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord came to pass in a prophetic way. And I said unto them, if ye think good, give me my hire, and if not, forbear. If you think I'm worth something, why don't you pay me? So they weighed for my hire how much? 30 pieces of silver. And Jehovah said unto me, cast it unto the potter, the goodly price that I was prized at by them. And I took the 30 pieces of silver and cast them into the potter in the house of the Lord. 30 pieces of silver, we already established from Exodus, was the price of just a slave that had been killed by an ox. And the 30 pieces of silver that they're paying Zechariah, as he's pictured here as revealing the word of the Lord, was just a paltry sum. In fact, it seems like in sarcasm, he calls it in verse 13, cast it unto the potter, the goodly price that I was prized at by them. Very high in sarcasm. It's a real handsome price here they paid for me. It was nothing. In fact, it was an insult. It was an insult. And so, in a sense, the life of Jesus was only worth to Judas, as well as these people with whom he bargained, what amounts to an insult, worth absolutely nothing to them, insofar as monetary concerns were concerned. And it's used also in Jeremiah, but here he mentions the potter, cast it to the potter. He did that in the front of the temple there. So you've got some parallels between what was going on in Zechariah's day and how he is picturing the Messiah whom the people would reject. Well, as Zechariah is saying, well, what do you think my work is worth? Oh, about 30 pieces of silver. You don't have to pay me anything. Oh, we'll give you 30 pieces of silver as an insult. And then the Lord says you toss it there for the potter. You couldn't make that up. You could not make that up. And all of this, all the typical imagery here that is fulfilled with Judas is just unimaginable, really. How all that could go swim together. All of that should do what to us? Increase our what? Increase our faith. That nobody could have put together anything like this. All right, anything else? We got just a few minutes. All right, let's turn our page to page 88, and we're skipping to Thursday. On the page, I mentioned Wednesday was evidently spent with the disciples in Bethany. Thursday was spent completely with the disciples until his arrest in Gethsemane after midnight. Thursday and Friday are long. You have the preparations that are made for the Passover, and then time goes by, and then we have the washing of the disciples' feet during the Passover, and then Judas goes out, and Jesus predicts Judas' betrayal and Peter's denial. And well, I've got it all. It's all on your page 88 there. And then Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper after the Passover. And then we have the lengthy speech in John 14, 15, and 16, where he speaks of his going away. Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also. And then he says, I'm not going to leave you comfortless. I'm going to send what? Or who? The Holy Spirit to you. And he will remind you what I've said. So I'm not going to leave you just, high and dry. You're going to be taken care of. And then the prayer in the 17th chapter. And then they go on down into the Kidron Valley, and they go into the Mount of Olives, and then we have the events there. Jesus prays thrice that this cup, what? pass away, nevertheless not my will, but thine be done. And then even as he's talking with the apostles, there's this cohort that comes led by Judas. Judas gives a hypocritical kiss. And in fact, before he does that, Jesus says, "Whom seek ye?" And they say, "Jesus of Nazareth. I'm he." They do it a second time, and the people fall back. And then Judas gives the kiss where it's showing its unnecessary, its complete uselessness. And then they take Jesus. But before that, Peter takes his sword and does what? Cuts off Malchus' right ear, and Jesus reattaches it. I mean, all that's going on Thursday night late. Okay, so here we are. Wednesday, no record. And then Thursday, this chart here is what you've got in your book. The Passover preparations are made evidently on Thursday, perhaps Thursday morning. We don't know that though. But all of these passages here deal with all of this, all the way through the arrest and being forsaken in the garden. Okay, we got 5 minutes. Let's do a little reading here. Matthew 26, 17 through 19. Kirsten, if you would. Matthew 26, 17 through 19. Sister Sandra, be ready to read Mark 14, 12 through 16. Sister Bobby, you feel like we're... okay. Brother Charlie, Luke 22, 7 through 13. Let's read these. Matthew 26, 17 through 19.
Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.' And the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover."
All right. You go to the city, and then we have a little more information in Mark's account. Mark, Sister Sandra, Mark 14, verses 12 through 16.
And the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, his disciples said unto him, "Where wilt thou that we go and prepare thou mayest eat the Passover?" And he sendeth forth 2 of his disciples, and he said unto them, "Go ye into the city, and there shall ye meet a man bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him. And wherefore he shall go in, say to the goodman of the house, The master saith, Where is the guest chamber, where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room, furnished and prepared, there made ready for us. And his disciples went forth and came into the city, and found as he had said unto them, and they made ready the Passover.
It'd be interesting to go through the accounts and find out in that last little phrase, they found it just as he said. How many times that happens. All right, in Luke's account, Luke 22, 7 through 13. Brother Charlie?
Then came the first day of the unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. And Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, Go and prepare the Passover for us, so that we may eat it. They said to him, Where do you want us to prepare it? And he said to them, When you have entered the city, a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him to the house he has entered. And you will shout, Say to the owner of the house, The teacher says to you, Where is the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large furnished upper room, prepare it there. And they left and found everything just as he had told them. They prepared the Passover.
All right, so they make ready the Passover. Can you imagine? You're going in, and here's a fellow that has a pitcher of water he's carrying, a purification, whatever, and drinking purposes. So we follow him, and we get to the, are you the man that we need to, yeah, I know Jesus. Come on in and see what we've got. And here's a room. Can you imagine? Everything is furnished. It's ready. All they needed was the lamb and the herbs, and that's just, it's kind of like checking out a banquet hall. Everything is just in place. Everything is perfect. You just need to bring that. And it was just as Jesus said. You're going to find a man with. I mean, Jesus is telling them that obviously before probably the guy even had water to carry. Reminds us in Acts 8. You remember, Philip is up in Samaria. Remember? He's up in Samaria. And he comes from Samaria down. If you're looking at a map this way, here's Jerusalem, here's Samaria. And the Ethiopian is going to, the Ethiopian eunuch is going from Jerusalem back. So the Spirit has to tell Philip to leave before possibly the Ethiopian left Jerusalem in order to intersect him down in Gaza. You know what I'm saying? So the Lord, you talk about thinking ahead. The Lord sees all this happening and then instructs Philip to go. Similarly, the Lord here sees this man, foresees this man with the, you go follow him. All right, so the Passover preparations are made. It's interesting when you compare the three accounts. On the first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover, the first day of unleavened bread, they were getting ready to eat the Passover. And the day of unleavened bread came, on which the Passover must be sacrificed. Now, we've made this point before. Could they eat any leavened bread on the Passover? Yes or no? No, that's in Exodus 12. But the Passover was, for one thing, to commemorate the passing over of the angel of the Lord over the houses that had the blood on the lintel, the post, and sparing the firstborn. The Feast of Unleavened Bread was a 7-day feast. Now remember, the 14th day, turn over real quick. Our time is about shot. If you go to Exodus 20, you got all the instructions of the Passover. Then you have the instructions for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Passover was the 1-day feast, first month, 14th day at evening. The Feast of Unleavened Bread was the 15th day through the 21st day. So you have a 7-day feast that was 15 through 21 inclusive. But then when you put the 14th with it, then it's an 8-day feast. From the 14th to the 21st, that they were not to eat anything that had been left. And so sometimes they're called by the same. Peter and John are the disciples who go. The American Standard King James used the phrase the goodman of the house, a word that means the master or the owner. Actually, the house tyrant. My time is at hand. I keep the Passover in the house of the disciples. So they found it just as the Lord said. Okay, comment or question on any of that? All right, we'll just have to pick up, not Wednesday, of course, but next Sunday. And we'll answer our questions on page 88 and go on. What we'll have then is the next part is Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And, of course, we only ought to do that when we have the Lord's Supper. Is that right? That's what some groups do. But, no. When did they wash feet? Feet were what? We're dirty. We're dirty. Sense of hospitality.